Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are gathered here today, both in person and virtually, to celebrate the launch of Gabriele Goldstone's Crowstone, published by Ronsdale Press. This is our second event of the year, and it feels particularly wonderful to welcome Gabriele physically back into the store. We launched the first book in this series virtually during the pandemic, so it's delightful to be able to gather in person while still offering a virtual component and truly celebrate her work. This evening will also feature a conversation with Gabriele's daughter about war, trauma, and family history. I just have a few quick housekeeping notes, and then I'll get out of your way and let the evening commence. In addition to hardship, Crowstone is also a story of friendship and small acts of mercy. It's inspired by Goldstone's mother's powerful memories of more than 2 years in a Soviet forced labor camp, and it's a remarkably contemporary tale of invasion and the plight of refugees. Gabriele will speak on the book a little bit from behind the podium, then we'll move along to the conversation. Following the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. If you're gathered here in person, we'll just ask you to put up your hand and I'll run over to you, Phil Donahue style, and extend the microphone to you. This is not a comment on your ability to project. It just ensures that those of us watching on YouTube can actually hear your question and avoids us having to repeat it. If you are watching on YouTube, please feel free to just write any questions you might have in the live chat accompanying this video, and we will put them to Gabriele as time permits. I'll give you some more details about actual signing procedure at the close of the event. Suffice it to say, the only thing I will put in your brains right now is that following the event, we'll ask you to remain in your seats for 1 moment while we safely transport Gabriele to a table just beside our cash desk where she'll be signing copies of the book. I'll have some more details for you once the dust has settled on the event. But for now, Gabriele Goldstone is the author of Crowstone, a novel inspired by her mother's wartime experiences. It's a novel she first began shaping within the nooks and crannies of this very bookstore during bi-weekly critique meetings with a writing group, the Anitas, back in halcyon pre-pandemic times. To tell us a little bit more, please join me in welcoming Gabriele Goldstone.
I'm going to read a bit from chapter 11, which is happening right around Christmas. And I hope you all had a great Christmas. And this is just the evening of my character Katya's Christmas, 1944. Christmas Day, 9 at night, and I'm taking the last train back to Stablock. My breath clouds the crisp night air. It's been a cold winter so far, and with the coal shortage, we'll all be freezing. Factories get to burn coal. That game Susanna and I played about the coal thieves is all too true. Factories get priority to burn coal. Sorry. Over the station's loudspeaker, Marlena Dietrich's sultry voice sings Lily Marlene. Its melancholy tone matches my mood. Has my own Lily, my friend, had the courage to tell her family about her condition? It's not a good time to have a baby. Listen to me. You think we'd already lost the war. After clambering up the train's ladder, I find an upholstered seat near the exit, surprised to know that the car is almost empty. Am I one of the few required to work at 6 tomorrow morning? Or maybe my coworkers took an earlier train. There are serious consequences for being late to a shift. Imagine our soldiers dying because they didn't have enough ammunition. That's guilt none of us could live with. The only other passenger, a soldier, catches my eye and winks. I bite my lower lip and then give him a smile. He needs encouragement, and encouraged he is because he saunters over. Mein Fräulein, may I join you? Of course, I stutter and inch closer to the window as the smell of alcohol wafts in my direction. Determined to be brave and kind, I add, Frohe Weihnachten. So it is. I'm Siegfried. He plops down beside me. Our thighs touch. Formerly Jakob, take your pick. Like my David, he changed his Jewish-sounding name to avoid unnecessary attention. I relax, feeling an immediate connection with this renamed stranger. Nice to meet you. I smile at his honesty and forgive him his tainted breath. You like being Siegfried? He shrugs. I prefer Jakob, but what does it matter now? After all, there are no Jews left. His statement sounds so nonchalant, but it terrifies me. Where did they all go, Jakob? And what are they doing wherever they are? Working in munition factories? I imagine a million Jews in long assembly lines, like an army munition factory, all working feverishly on a big secret project. Even the children. I see Helmut barking out orders at them with his cruel mouth. I imagine my old friend Minna flirting with all the good-looking young Jewish men, dazzling even the Nazis with her teasing eyes. Minna would manage. She wouldn't let some Nazi like Helmut destroy her. Jakob's voice breaks into my thoughts like a snapping whip. Dead. Who's dead? I turn and look at the stranger. The Jews, they're all dead, even the children. I get this feeling in my stomach like I've been kicked. I don't believe you, I whisper. Yes, you do. Siegfried once Jakob stares hard at me. We have camps for them to die in. You've heard of Arbeit macht frei? I nod. My old employer, Herr Richter, liked to joke about it. Some die slowly from too much work and others die. I hedge away from this soldier, but he nudges himself closer. And I'm grateful when the train squeals to a stop. But it's not my stop, and I feel trapped by this soldier and his words. When the train starts up again after a session of hissing and sputtering, I change the topic. Did you see the newsreel about Nemmersdorf? Did you see what the Russians did to those poor villagers? I saw what we Germans did in Ukraine, a little village close to Zhytomyr. Women and children stuffed into a barn and burned alive. I hold my breath. My heart beats faster. Where was Albert? Wasn't he in Ukraine? Didn't he go to the Zhytomyr area? I was there, Siegfried, once Jakob continues. I heard the screams for mercy. I heard the shots that replied. I saw the blackened. Stop. I hold my hand up against his mouth. When he kisses it, I quickly drop my hand and look out the window, but there's only my reflection to be seen. Of course, I know that the Germans are killing people, but do I need to hear it spoken out loud like this on Christmas Day? Siegfried once Jakob now forces my hand up against my mouth. Did you feel my kiss? Is your hand still warm? Return it to me. I need a kiss too. I'm frozen, but my heart hammers madly like ice pellets against a window. Can you feel anything? Siegfried once Jakob asks, dropping my hand and moving away. I don't want to think about death. I lean closer to the cold window, trying to see past my reflection. We're killing everyone, he says, Russians, Poles, Ukrainians, and every single Jew, old, young, and in between, you and me. I turn from the window and stare hard at him, at hazel eyes that look sadder than a lonely dog's. Why are you telling me this? There's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing I can do about it either. Siegfried once Jakob agrees and stares past me out the window. So we just wait for our fate? We just wait for the Russians to come and nail our tongues to the table? I shudder with the Nemmersdorf image. Of course not. He looks at me again. We run for our lives, because once they catch us, we will each get what we deserve. It's Christmas, I protest, staring down at my bullet-making hands folded in my lap. I want to feel cozy and happy for this one day of the year. Go ahead, he says. I don't blame you. Your cozy, happy time is ending. The Russians will soon be here. Jakob gets up. Involuntarily, my hand reaches towards him. Don't go, I'm scared. Siegfried Jakob sits back down and gives me a long, lingering kiss on my lips this time. I don't fight it. I give in, make it last longer. Maybe this is all there is, a few minutes of connection with a stranger on a train. Siegfried Jakob pulls away. Mine's the next stop. Thank you for the kiss, I'll remember it. I nod, my lips bruised. I don't even know the name of the place he gets off at. He's an unknown. But then he never asked me for my name. I stare again at my reflection and touch my lips. For you, David, that kiss was for you. When I get to my stop and hurry towards the security gate, I start to laugh. If I tell Lily about this, she'll tell me I imagined the whole thing. So that was Christmas. And I just want to give a snippet, thank you. I just want to give a snippet several weeks later. So the book is divided into two parts. The first half is called East Prussian Refugee, and the second part is called Soviet Starosta. So this is just a taste of what happens in the second half. We stumble along past the polluted streams as pussy willows lose their kitten plush, morph into Poland dusty worms, then leaf into green. Spring insists on life in spite of burned out houses, charred trees, blackened fields. I don't wipe away the tears trickling down my face when we encounter a pair of storks industriously mending their nest on a broken chimney. We're all crying and no one asks another why. A warm breeze tickles my face as we trudge along, 5 in a row, a wide river of crying women from dawn until dusk. We don't talk, we have nothing to say. At night it's still cold. We huddle like cows on the thawing ground, drinking water from puddles like orphaned dogs. Rivers contaminated with death, littered with empty prams, broken furniture, and bloated bodies continue to flow. Death contaminates us all. At least I can sleep. Sheer exhaustion promises me that dreamless escape. As the grass sprouts, I eat it. Weak old or sick women collapse. Gunshots mark their final escape. Is death dreamless too? My legs keep up a rhythm, all their own, but keep moving me forward. Or are they moving me backward, back to my home? I always wanted to go back, holding tight to David on a proud Truckhaner horse, not defeated like this. I'm grateful to be wearing boots, but how long will they last with this mad march? The weather changes after the full moon. For 3 days it pours, cold rain that makes me shiver. It quenches my thirst and cleans me too. Still, I'm not clean for long, and soon I'm muddier than ever. We get stuck walking in each other's footsteps, but I'm determined not to lose my leather boots. I'm determined to re-enter the Soviet Union with proper German footwear. Until one day, some squelching rut swallows up my left boot, and there's no time for me to fight for it. I take off the other boot and cradle it like a child as I continue walking barefoot. For my complaining stomach, grass isn't enough. As a side dish, I eat sand and small stones. Pretend food. It gives my stomach something to do so it doesn't forget why it's there. Crushed rock with grass is better than nothing. One warm day, when the sun is high in the sky, we're told to stop. A commandant comes and announces soup ahead. Red Cross relief workers spoon it out. Katya! Who's calling my name? Shielding my eyes from the sun, I look around. Katya, is that you? I keep looking, and then I see Natasha, one of the relief workers in the makeshift field kitchen. Can my squinting eyes be deceiving me? I open my mouth and close it again, speechless. Natasha, our family's servant girl from another time, when Papa was a kulak before he became an enemy of the people. Later, after our Siberian exile, I'd seen Natasha as a kolkhoz worker. She'd given me food, strawberries from my mother's garden, rather from our former garden. It had all become part of the kolkhoz, the collective. Back then, Natasha had stolen my clothes, including my favorite green velvet dress that Mama had made me. Today, Natasha wears a filthy red cross apron over her tattered-looking outfit, as tattered as mine. Cleaner, maybe. Nobody's clothes could be dirtier than mine. Natasha? In spite of myself, my eyes brim over with tears. She's not a girl anymore, yet I still recognize her because of her dramatically beautiful eyes. Natasha gives me a studied stare. You haven't changed that much, you know. Then she hugs me, and I squeeze back with a desperate gratefulness. When did we become such friends? How can this be? She murmurs into my shoulder. We've both grown up. I shake my head, unable to control my weeping. She pushes me back. Look at us two. I'm so happy to see you. The war's almost over. Your Hitler is dead. Natasha stops smiling. Her dark eyes cloud over. I guess the war's not over for you. Where are they taking you? I don't know. Siberia, I suppose. Your favorite place. Natasha looks around the makeshift relief kitchen. Everyone's busy doing their little job, peeling turnips, stirring pots, passing out colorless soup that looks more like dirty water. The long straggly line of hungry POWs seems endless. Natasha runs into a nearby tent and reemerges with something round wrapped in a towel. This will help you. It's bread, a whole loaf of dark bread. I inhale its yeastiness. Food has a lot of power for eating, trading, for living. Thank you. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. Gabrielle will now share a conversation with her oldest daughter, Kirsten, officially an authority in all things Gabriele Goldstone, but someone who grew up never quite understanding who her Oma was.
Right. So, Mom, another book about Oma. What is this now? It's the fourth book about her.
Yeah, you're right. The first one, The Kulak's Daughter, was re-released as Redstone, so that counts as the same book. And then there was Broken Stone and Tainted Amber.
And the first one was set in Ukraine, right? That's where Oma was born?
Yes, delivered via stork in 1919 to the village of Fedorovka near Zhytomyr.
And that makes her Ukrainian.
Well, technically, yes. That area was part of the Ukrainian People's Republic, a country which existed for 3 years between 1917 and 1920. That didn't last, and the area was absorbed into the Soviet Union. So she spent her first 12 years as a Soviet citizen. She learned Ukrainian in the neighborhood, Russian in school, and spoke German at home. She was thus an ethnic German or a German Russian, and multi-ethnicity was common in Eastern Europe, and that's still a multilingual area of Europe.
So if she was German Russian, was she Mennonite?
No, she wasn't Mennonite, although parts of southern Ukraine and the Volga area had fair-sized Mennonite colonies. My mom's family had originally been Lutheran, migrating from the Gdansk or Danzig area in the 1860s. Her dad, my grandfather, had been born in Ukraine, and as an adult, he converted to being a Baptist. And that area of Ukraine, historically known as Volhynia, had a thriving Baptist community with churches and even a training seminary for teachers and pastors, which I was able to find.
Okay, so she was a German Russian Baptist in what is now modern Ukraine. Sounds confusing.
Right, I agree.
Okay, so Ukrainian is always in the news right now, but in 2010, when your first book, The Kulak's Daughter, came out, Ukraine was kind of just, for me, a faraway place. And I mostly just remembered little bits of that first book. There was the Forbidden Christmas, when Stalin banned religion.
Right, I'm glad you remember something of that, because I used to go on and on. I knew you guys weren't always listening. Okay, so yeah, the Soviet Union was an atheist state and considered religion the opiate of the people. So churches were turned into grain storage facilities.
And I remember when Oma shared that story around the Christmas dinner table.
Right, you guys were little and you were getting kind of restless, and I was trying to get you to behave, but she started telling that story and you listened, and I just thought, I have the makings of a kid's story here.
Yeah, it had the sled and the secret Christmas tree, the windmill, her dog Zenta, and the exile to Siberia in a freight car. It was very sad.
Yeah, well, kids like sad stories. Right. Yes, it was about collectivization and the liquidation of the kulaks.
And what were the kulaks?
Landowners, and they weren't even necessarily rich landowners. My grandfather, it turned out, had 17 hectares, but he also had a windmill, and that made him an enemy of the people because he hired private help.
And what is the Redstone connection?
Okay, so when I was visiting Ukraine, I talked to the oldest woman in the village, and she remembered my mom's family, and she took me to the foundation of the windmill, and it was marked by red granite. So I took a piece of that red granite home illegally and put a piece of that in my mother's pocket when she was buried.
Right. Oma died in 2011, so she did get to read that first book, which came out in 2010. What did she think of the book?
Well, my mother, maybe this is typical, but my mother was hard to please, and of course I never told it right. I never got it right. And she did like to show it off when she was in a nursing home, but she also liked to complain about it.
Well, I guess that seeing your own personal history written as fiction would be kind of jarring. I mean, how could you get it right? You weren't there.
I was quite aware of that. That's why I wrote it as a piece of fiction. It wasn't memoir, it wasn't nonfiction, it was a novel. But my mother considered stories to be broodlose Kunst.
Broodlose Kunst.
Broodlose Kunst means breadless art. Yeah, so she didn't encourage reading. I mean, she saw me and my dad, who were both reading addicts, as wasting our time. And she definitely didn't want to see me pursue writing. That was definitely way beyond what she wanted from her daughter.
Okay, but after Redstone, there was a sequel, Broken Stone. Remind us what that was about.
Okay, so Broken Stone, the title represents the broken family. After my grandmother died during the exile in Siberia, the kids were basically orphaned. My mom was the oldest. Her dad had been put into jail by the NKVD, and he did arrange to have the four surviving kids move to East Prussia, where he had a brother, and he had every intention of following, but he couldn't get his exit visa approved.
So what happened to your grandfather?
1937, the Great Terror, he was found guilty of treason and executed. And this was a very common charge against former kulaks.
Wow. So how did you find this out?
Well, I was able to access the secret police archives in Zhytomyr. My mom was 85 when I finally was able to tell her what had happened to her father. And they had a lot of files on all the former kulaks.
So Broken Stone was a fairly dark book, but then it ended on a positive note.
Well, I do try to show resilience and hope in all my stories about her. Tenacious, I think that would define her.
Yeah, she was pretty short, but I think she was always pretty tough too.
Under 5 feet, definitely a survivor though. I wanted to show that she was more than just a little old lady who couldn't speak English properly.
Okay, so after that, we have the third book, which is Tainted Amber, and that came out with a new publisher.
Right, I was grateful to have Ronsdale publish Tainted Amber. I've been feeling rather discouraged with the whole publishing journey. It's complicated, but I guess I have some of Oma's genes because giving up was not an option.
And to research the Tainted Amber, you went on a bike trip to, you went to East Prussia, which doesn't exist anymore. So explain to me, where is that? It's Eastern Europe.
Okay, if you look at that little handout, my daughter passed out. Image 1, there is a map of the former East Prussia, once Germany's most eastern province, now divided amongst Lithuania, Russia, and Poland. And the area overflows with history, much of it damaged because of war. And from the Baltic states, we cycled, and I have my co-cycler here. Yeah, so we cycled from Latvia, from Riga, and had a couple of van rides in between, but we ended up in Gdansk, and we cycled along the Russian and Polish coast.
Okay, so what were you looking for when you went on this bike trip?
Baltic spa towns, linden trees, old ruins, her former home, Königsberger Klopse, which is a type of meatball, cobbled roadways, amber.
And did you find it?
We found lots. The Baltic spa towns still retain the romantic flavor from the 100+ years ago. The old linden trees, if you look at image 8 there, you can see somebody from our group cycling along the narrow roadways that were built during the Nazi years. That was part of the Berlinka new expressway between Königsberg and Berlin. We found graveyards filled with Soviet and German soldiers, bullet-ridden ruins. I found the old house that my mom had lived in, the neglected country estates, and I even spotted a wild hedgehog, an unplanned bonus.
Hedgehogs, okay. Very cute, but why is the third book called Tainted Amber? And it's not called Cute Hedgehogs.
Well, the former East Prussian coastline is famous for its amber, and it's been known as the Amber Coast for hundreds of years.
And remind us what amber is.
It's fossilized pine resin, and I was captivated by the idea of how ancient amber captured life inside it, and it reminded me of what East Prussia had been, beautiful and brutal, and the amber seemed like a time capsule.
So the amber is a metaphor, right?
Right, of how the Nazis destroyed East Prussia with their intolerance of Jews, of Slavs, of Roma, of homosexuals, of hereditary disease.
Right, the Nazis were not tolerant of anybody who was different.
Not at all. And my mom felt stigmatized as well. Her background made her feel like an outsider. In Tainted Amber, she falls in love with someone who is also marked as not good enough because of his epilepsy, which according to the Nuremberg laws in 1935 meant sterilization.
Right, and Tainted Amber is set in 1937, right?
Yes, and it ends with the annexation of Austria in March 38.
Okay, so that takes us to Crowstone, the fourth book.
Finally, yes. Okay, Crowstone begins 6 years later as the war is ending.
And in the author's note at the back, you write about the fact that Oma actually did kill and eat a crow. Maybe you should explain how you learned about this.
Okay, so we're sitting in her nursing home here in Winnipeg, Tuxedo Villa, looking out the window, and the crow settles down on the tree outside. It's March, tree's bare, and my mom says, "It's coming to get me like before." And that was the anecdote around which I built the novel.
So that is the crow in the title. Tell us about the stone.
Well, that represents her courage, her determination, her resilience, her stubbornness, things we mentioned earlier.
Okay, let's talk about what the character of Katya, or my real life Oma, what is she doing in Crowstone? Where is she?
In the first half of the book, she's still in East Prussia, now forced to work in a munition factory in Stabach, south of Königsberg near the modern Polish border. And you can see again on image 4 there.
So it opens in November of 1944. Oma would have been 25 then.
Right, and November was her younger brother's birthday, and he's pictured in image 2.
Right, and that's the character Albert in the book.
Right, he'd been a character in the 3 earlier books, and in Crowstone, he's now a soldier in the Wehrmacht. I got the impression my mom and him were close, and when I found his photo and a copy of his own POW card, I wanted to make him real, so I gave him the opening chapter of the book, and images 3 and 6 are copies of the POW postcard that he sent, and he was never heard from again.
So this novel ends in July of 1947. Why does it end then? That's 2 years after the war ended.
That's when my mother was released from the Soviet camp. Image 5 is her POW release papers. I had the book designer incorporated the POW postcard onto the cover, and I'm really happy to Julie Cochran for doing that.
Okay, so going back in time just a little bit, she was working in an arms factory in January of 1945 when the Soviets were starting to break past Nazi defenses. That's pretty ominous.
Well, the German media was carefully controlled. While there were rumors of a growing Soviet army about to attack, the official line was that the situation was under control. Think of last January when the Russian army was practicing maneuvers around Ukraine. Hitler focused his resources on the Western Front and had left the Eastern Front vulnerable. And it was women, children, and the elderly who were left exposed to the Soviet wrath.
And so how were they going to escape from the Soviets? Were they going to go by train, by car, by foot?
Well, there's no fuel left over for these civilian vehicles, and the trains were stuffed full with the Wehrmacht. So many fled on foot, or if they were lucky, horse and wagon. The Wehrmacht hadn't confiscated their horses.
And where were they going?
They were trying to get to the Baltic harbors like Pillow. If you look on the map there, you can see where Pillow is now. It's called Baltiesk. And they were trying to get to Pillow or Gdynia or Gottenhafen. The Nazis had convened Operation Hannibal on January 23rd, 45, which was an escape plan via ship to safer ports like Kiel, further up the Baltic. The cold weather meant that they could take a shortcut over the frozen Frische Meere on their way to Pillow. And this is when the Wilhelm Gustloff, the SS von Steuben, and other big ships were sunk by the Soviet torpedoes.
But Oma didn't make it that far.
No, she didn't. Somewhere en route, possibly on the roads that I was able to cycle back in 2019, she was overtaken by the tanks of the Soviet army.
And this was happening late January or February of 1945.
Somewhere around there. She was trying to get to the Baltic along with her 2 younger sisters, who've also made appearances in all 4 books, and then she ended up separated from them.
How did that happen?
Well, the roads were complete mayhem. Young children were separated from their moms, some quickly buried in shallow graves. My one aunt was looking out for a lost toddler, and that probably saved her from the forced labor recruitment. The Soviets were choosing women capable of hard labor to take back into the Soviet Union for reparation work, a deal that Stalin had made earlier with the Allies.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the author's note in the book that about 200,000 women were sent to the Soviet Union as forced laborers. What happened to her 2 sisters, your aunts?
Well, once the Third Reich capitulated, her two sisters were stuck in East Prussia, and they were then forced to work in the newly established collectives, which was a really terrible time for them.
And Oma was sent east.
Right. My mom headed to an open pit mine in the Urals. She walked or traveled in a freight car, depending on the availability of trains, which were being used to confiscate German machinery. And she walked along unbroken train tracks.
The Urals, what are those?
Okay, the Urals are a mountain range, more than 2,700 kilometers east of East Prussia. To put this into perspective, it's about 2,300 kilometers from Winnipeg to Vancouver. So the Urals create the natural border between Europe and Asia. It's a heavy industrialized zone where Stalin had established Tangograd, far from the reaches of any Nazi invaders. And that area required a lot of hydroelectricity for their factories, and it was generated by the nearby coal.
So she worked in a coal mine.
Right, open pit near Chelyabinsk. She wrote down some of those memories about those times, and I found scraps of them in between her papers, in between saved recipes and budget lists.
I've heard of Chelyabinsk. A meteor fell there a few years ago.
Right, Southern Urals, yeah.
Okay, so your mom, my Oma, she was there for more than 2 years.
Yes, I grew up hearing about Bunsen, lice, and coal mines, about cabbage and rats, and about this friend of hers who turned into an ice cube, and it took me years to figure out that the Bunsen were bedbugs, supposedly a huge torment.
Right, and you list some of those experiences in the book. You can find them in the author's note. Let me share a few of them. One is rape was inevitable.
Yes, it was encouraged by Stalin, any age, old and young. Solzhenitsyn wrote about it in his narrative poem, Prussian Nights. His empathy for the victimized women and children resulted in his demotion as a Soviet captain and eventual Gulag imprisonment.
And another thing from the author's note is you write her naked buttocks were pinched to determine her labor capabilities.
Right, after a physical exam, they were categorized into different labor camps. There was tree felling in Siberia for the strongest women, coal mines in the Ural, and farm work on collectives for the weakest.
And another thing, you also write that she helped to sober up a drunk Soviet officer.
Yes, she mentioned this a few times, and I wanted to show how alcohol abuse was rampant. But knowing that she helped sober up a drunk Soviet guard helped me appreciate the potential relationships between guards and prisoners and reveal the human side to the Russians. I wanted to make them real people in the novel through these little acts of kindness.
I think it worked.
You're saying you actually read it? I realize you and the rest of the family have been kind of tired of hearing me harangue on and on about this history. So thank you for reading it.
I really think that your research journey has helped me appreciate Oma and also your immigrant background.
You know, growing up in the 60s, when other moms in our St. James suburb talked about the war, and it was still really real back then, they talked with nostalgia about soldiers in uniforms, about romance or music. My mom talked about bedbugs, disease, cabbage soup, and rats. I was determined to move away from home as soon as I could. I wanted to forget it all and just be Canadian. But now I realize it's part of my history. And therefore, it's part of your history. And I couldn't learn this stuff in school. There was no book about German female prisoners of war. There was no East Prussia on any map. So I had to write these stories myself. And I want to pass them on to my family because it's your right to know who you are and where you've come from. 14 million ethnic Germans were displaced after the war. Many came to Canada and assimilated. Their histories buried under stigma and shame. Maybe you could read that Thomas Mann quote from the start of the book.
I have it here. This is from the BBC. It was in December of 1945. Those whose world became gray a long time ago when they realized what mountains of hate towered over Germany. Those who a long time ago imagined during sleepless nights how terrible would be the revenge on Germany for the inhuman deeds of the Nazis cannot help but view with wretchedness all that is being done to the Germans by the Russians, Poles, and Czechs as nothing other than a mechanical and inevitable reaction to the crimes that people have committed as a nation in which, unfortunately, individual justice or the guilt or innocence of the individual can play no part.
Right. I'll continue to carry that guilt. I own it. But by sharing this story, I lighten my load because I can't change who I am or who my parents were. Neither can you or any of us. Our families, whether we are ashamed or proud of them, will always be our families. And to know their stories is to heal from their traumas.
And as Canadians, we all have different stories, don't we?
It's a rich heritage. You asked me at the beginning whether Oma was German, Ukrainian, or Russian. I like to say that she died a Canadian, and she was very proud and grateful to have her Canadian documents to prove this.
Maybe our generation takes peace and democracy for granted.
Maybe just a bit. Even today, history is being made and remade. The human rights NGO Memorial, which investigates repression during the Stalin years, was liquidated by Russia just in 2021. History is being manipulated as we speak. Wars happening right now are built on the distortions of truth.
Anything else?
I just want to quote Toni Morrison. She said, if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, you have to write it. So Crowstone was the book I wanted to read as a young person growing up. I encourage others to tell their own stories. It's through books that we learn to empathize with other points of view. We learn to forgive. It's why officials ban books. It's why the Nazis had book burnings.
Thanks, Mom. Okay, this is the part of the evening when we have a Q&A. Yeah, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Hi there. This is a question for both of you. How have your opinions of your mom and your Oma changed through the writings of these books?
I will say quite a lot. You know, before my mom started working on this, which I would say was around the time I was in late elementary school, I never thought very much about my Oma's history. They were, you know, German, and that's all I had to go on. And it really, I think, made me look at my Oma, my mom's mom, in quite a new light, realizing that, you know, someone who I encountered as an old lady who lived in St. James and had raspberry bushes and you know, a game of crokinole in the kitchen, actually had quite a life, and a difficult life. And it's admirable that people can go through adversity and keep going. And it really opened my eyes. Like, I wouldn't have known about any of that if it wasn't for my mom.
And for me, it's my mom and I didn't have the greatest relationship. I mean, she was just so un-Canadian in my mind. And I wanted to get away from home. And I think this is, writing these stories is my way of trying to mend our relationship. She was a difficult woman, actually, and I was a difficult kid.
We do have a question from somebody watching online who was wondering, when did your mother come to Canada, Gabrielle?
She came in 1953.
And were there any other? Yes.
Does that mean there's another book in the offing about how she comes to Canada?
Well, there's definitely a continuation. I don't know whether it'll ever become a book, but it's on submission.
So I'm the brother of this wonderful author. And
My
we grew up with the same sort of things. My question is, she's written some really, and I've heard these stories throughout my entire life. She's put it into books, and it's fantastic. My dad comes into this, and know she's interested in writing the book. Her dad is involved, and I'm really interested if that comes out.
Patience.
I'm sorry, can you remind me how old Katya is in this book?
Oh, she turns 25.
Thank you.
Let me try asking a question. I know I've gotten a couple times about this book already, is about what type of book it is in terms of, is it an adult book? Is it a children's book?
It's classified YA crossover, which means that it's for older teens and adults. I mean, there's some violence in the book that wouldn't be appropriate for middle graders.
You know, I came to Canada in 1948. And when we came to Canada in May, and I started school in grade 6 in September, and some of the kids, they treated me as if I was a Nazi because I came from Germany, didn't know English very well. And, you know, then you don't want to be a DP. It was difficult, yeah. I was 12 at the time. So a lot of what you read there, I can identify with, because we were right in the middle of the war. Yeah.
That's why that Thomas Mann quote was important to me too, because we, as people that had German connections through language or ethnicity, were stigmatized and we were ashamed. I was. And I know my brother was, and now we kind of think, did that really happen? But it did. It really was a very anti-German world in the 1960s here. And for good reason. I mean, nobody could understand how a country so civilized like Germany could let Nazism take over. And yet we had someone like Trump almost make it to power. So if we don't pay attention to what's happening in our political systems, you know, I mean, that's why I wrote Tainted Amber, because for me, Tainted Amber was about the nurturing that let someone like Hitler take over. And this was the result. I mean, the war and what happened to people like my mom, and to the victims of the Nazis, was because someone like Hitler, or potentially someone like Putin right now, or Trump, could destroy what we take for granted, peace and democracy.
Oh, right. Any put our last call for questions, and if not, I know my mom has a few thank yous that she wants to make before we wrap up.
I just want to thank you for writing the book. You know, I have, my husband watches war movies. There are more war movies in the way you describe in St. James, where soldiers and all that type, but it really is deserving of the women and the civilians there. It was an extremely powerful book. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I want to thank, I have so many people to thank, but I want to thank each of you for coming out on this Friday the 13th, risking your life. Never mind the Friday the 13th, but it's also, you know, probably the coldest day we've had in a couple of weeks. Anyway, I appreciate each one of you. And I wish this story about war, about refugees, about POWs, and about death was growing stale or moldy like old bread, but it's very much a fresh and current story. Crows continue to haunt our world. I'm so grateful to Ronsdale Press, to Wendy Atkinson and Kevin Walsh, who have been so supportive throughout this book's publishing journey. Thank you to Julie Cochran, the book's designer. Thank you to my editor, Robin So, who guided me as I shaped this novel into its present form. And I did that in the month of July when I wanted to go kayaking, but this was worth it. This was worth it, totally. Thank you to my writing friends who have become so much more than fellow writers. We're fellow travelers. I know some of you are out there in Zoom world, but I have Mel here. So parts of this story were shared in these little corners here. Yeah, so for my writing group, no one thought it'd be easy. We have each had our share of disappointments And yet we're still going, still writing, because we can't help but scratch this itch, I tell you. Okay, so thank you to McNally Robinson for making this space where books and ideas flourish happen, and where so many of us bookworms find a welcoming space and community. Thank you to John Taves, whose organizational skills make a book launch run so smoothly, and whose graciousness makes every writer feel special. And thank you to my family, who have to put up with my book obsession, whether they like it or not. Writing offers no guarantees of success, and there have been many stretches of doubt and struggle. Good thing I had an awesome day job, and some of my coworkers are here. We had the best. Okay, thank you to Canada for giving my family, my mom and other war refugees a new home. And thank you to my mom, who inspired me to not give up. Thank you.
And thank you, Gabrielle, so much for sharing the latest installment in Katya's incredible journey here with us tonight, and for all your kind words. We are going to move along to the signing portion of this evening right now. So as previously mentioned, we will transport Gabrielle over to a table, which is just beside our cash desk. Please do venture over there when she is seated to have a copy of the book signed. We have copies of the book both at the table itself and behind our cash desk. You can get a book signed before you pay for it. Just please pay for it. Otherwise, I will continue the gratitude, because we are so grateful to Ronsdale for publishing this book, for helping us celebrate tonight. To Kirsten for hosting this event as well. Thank you so very much for coming on board. To all of you who joined us here, both in person, and all of you watching live on YouTube, both now and in the future, thank you kindly. This video will remain live, so if you'd like to share it with anybody who was unable to be here tonight, please feel free to do so. It's just on our YouTube channel. And now I will thank you all one final time and invite you all to join me in acknowledging Gabriele Goldstone. Thank you so much.